everybody, it's Mariana with Three Peaks Classroom. If you are new to my channel, hello and welcome. I am a teacher here in Alberta, Canada, and I love to make helpful YouTube videos for other teachers just like you. In today's video, I want to talk to you about how I teach and how I introduce fictional narrative writing in my classroom. Recently on my channel, I did an episode that talked about 9 different units that you need to have in your language arts writing program. And one of those, actually the first one that I mentioned, was about narrative writing. And so today I want to go into detail about how I, as a classroom teacher, go ahead and introduce the topic, teach the students the topic, and how we talk about and write about fictional narratives in our classrooms. Now, this lesson and the materials that I'm going to be presenting to you today are taken directly from my grade 3 and my grade 4 writer's notebooks, which are part of my language arts notebook series. In my notebooks, I give you the title strips, so you teach the students this is the title of the lesson and these are the materials that you put in, and together you create an anchor chart. So this is my grade 3 version and my grade 4 version. Here we go. So story workshop is what I like to call it in grade 4. And you can see in grade 4, it starts to get a little bit more involved. In the grade 3, we're just learning the basics. And then grade 4, we're starting to add things like suspense, dialogue, solution, things like that. So let's jump right in. How I approach every single lesson in my classroom looks very similar. I always start with some sort of a hook. So a question or discussion or some sort of a video or picture or something to hook my students in. And then we move into defining it. So talking about what it is exactly that we are going to be talking about. And then the third part is the actual instruction, the lesson. And then the fourth part is the practice. And by practice, I mean a gradual release of responsibility. And so I will do it. I will model it completely start to finish for my students. And then the second time we go around doing it, I will do it with their help. So we'll do it all together as a class. They'll tell me what I need to write or whatever. And then the third one is they are going to do it together in small groups or with a partner. And then the fourth and final way is that they are going to do it themselves on their own. So to begin my lesson on narrative writing, so remember, we're going to be teaching students about characters, setting, plot structure, beginning, middle, and end, etc. To hook my students in, to get them excited about this unit, I will gather on the carpet and I'm going to tell them an exciting story that happened to me on the weekend or over the summer. And I like to go camping and hiking with my family. That's no surprise to my kids. And so actually, there's a mountain right there just to prove it. And so I will share a story with my students about how I went hiking the other day. And, I was in the mountains and the trees were absolutely gorgeous. And it was me and my husband and my 2 kids and our dog. And we were hiking and it was just such a lovely day. The birds were chirping and we came across this waterfall. It was absolutely stunning. We had a great day. We sat down and we had some snacks. And then I turned around and I noticed that our dog Teddy wasn't there. And normally we let Teddy go, and explore a little bit, but this was serious. He was nowhere to be found. And, we kept walking around and we kept calling out his name. And soon other hikers that were on the trail as well, they noticed that we were starting to get worried. And so we could not find him. And we had a lot of people looking for him. And we kept calling out his name and calling out his name. And then we heard something in the distance, like crumble, like maybe a tree had fallen or something. And so we got panicked and we all started running towards it. And when we approached the fallen down tree, we looked behind us and our dog Teddy was right there and he was safe and unharmed. And so we were so relieved and we put him back on our leash and we decided to walk together as a family and everybody was safe and we made it back to our car. Okay, now that was a made up story, but I hope you enjoyed that. But that's exactly what I would share with my students. I would share with them a story, an oral story from my experience, but I would make sure that I had setting. So I talked about the waterfalls, the birds chirping, etc. And then I talked about who was involved. So my family, my dog, etc. I also included other hikers in the story as well. We talked about how in the beginning it was nice and I eased into the conflict. So how we sat down and had a snack, but then Teddy went off, which in the beginning wasn't an issue because he normally likes to go and look around. But after a while we started to get nervous and then we started to really get nervous and we couldn't find him. And we heard other hikers noticing our worry. So then they joined in. So I'm building up this suspense. And then we hear a massive crack in the distance and we all go running towards it, which is the most exciting part of the story. And then we turn around and my dog happened to be right behind us. I probably could have fixed the solution up a little bit better, but whatever. And so I went through all the parts of a fictional narrative story just through my oral storytelling. And I hoped that I captivated them. Now, the first part of that lesson shouldn't take very long. My oral storytelling should maybe take max 5 minutes. But then I'm going to move into the second part of a quality lesson, and that is the definition. So using chart paper, I would have my students retell the story to me, and I'll say, I want you to let me know if you remember who were the people in my story. I wouldn't even use the word characters. I would just say, who are the people in my story? Okay, me, my husband, my kids, my dog. Awesome. And where did we go? Do you guys remember where we went? Okay, we went to the mountains. Do you remember specifically what I talked about? There was a waterfall. There were birds. There were lots of trees. Okay, let's write that down. And then what happened in the beginning of the story? And hopefully they remembered that we had a snack and we were relaxing. And then we talk about every single part of the story. And I would write everything down. And what they won't notice, or perhaps they might, is that I'll write it down so that it kind of resembles a triangle or like a mountain. But I'm not going to define it yet. I'm literally just writing down what they have retold me from the story. Once I have filled out all those details, then I will draw a mountain and I will say, these are the parts of a story that make every story exciting. So we need this, and I will label it and say, these people are called characters, and I'll write the word characters. And then I'll circle the next part and I'll say, we also need to know where the story is taking place, and that is called the setting. So I'm going to write down the word setting, and then going in and I'll say, this is the beginning part of the story, and I'll write beginning. And then the middle is when a lot of the exciting things happen. And then the end is when we were walking to our car and everything was okay. And so for grade 3, I have labeled those things. Now, I'll move into the instruction part of my lesson as well. So after we've defined everything, then we go back to our desks and I will get them to open up their notebooks and we'll glue this in and we'll say this is called a story or a fictional narrative. Fictional meaning I made it up. And then I will give them this puzzle piece and we'll fill it out and we'll say every good story needs a title. Every good story needs a setting, and so I'll refer back to my chart paper and I'll say, remember, we talked about the mountains here. Every good story has to have characters. You don't need a lot of characters to have a good story, so here we go. And then every story has something that happens in the beginning, something that happens in the middle, and something that happens in the end. Depending on the amount of time that you have for this lesson, this would be a very natural spot to end the lesson. Once you've created this, and we've talked about my hiking story and how it has all of those pieces for a good story, I would naturally end the lesson here unless I know that I have another block where I can move into. Either way, whether this is a continuation or it's the next day, then you're going to follow up with the second part of the lesson. I would continue the lesson now by reading I would read a short story. So the first one was me orally telling the story. The second time we go around explaining this, then I would be reading a very short story from a book. After I have read the story out loud, then I would prompt my students. I would say, okay, my friends, let's use our puzzle piece. Let's make sure that this story has every piece to the puzzle. So what's the title? Great. Who were the people? Where did the story take place? So they would hopefully remind me. Awesome. What clues in the story told me the setting? Characters. Who can remember the names of the people? And can you tell me a way that you would describe that character? So we're leaning into that. Then you would talk about, well, what happened in the beginning? What happened in the middle of the story? What was really, really exciting? That's going to happen right in the middle. And then how did the story finish off? And so once we've talked about it together as a class, we've done 2 examples now, my hiking story and the story that I've read to my students. Now that I have given my students the foundational lesson on how to write a story, this is when our unit is kicked off. And like I mentioned, fictional narrative is an entire unit that you will need to devote in your language arts program. For me, in my year plans, it takes a solid month. So if I look at my grade 3 or my grade 4 year plans, if I look, I think we touch it in February. Yes. So in February, Writer's Notebook, we are talking about fictional narratives. And the very first week, we've done the introductory lesson. And we're also moving into what is setting and character. That is the very first unit. So if I'm looking at my grade 3 notebook, on day 1, we did all of that. We talked about all of this. Then the next day, I am going to introduce explicitly, I'm teaching them, this is what a setting is. And we'll make this anchor chart together. And once we've made this anchor chart, Then I will have them bring out their own piece of paper and I will say, can you think of a few different settings that you could write about? And so for me, it would be like camping or the mountains or whatever. And I would get students to write down like 3 examples of settings. And let's practice describing those settings with some really, really juicy details. And then the last part is characters. So then we're talking about how do we introduce a character? How do we describe what that character looks like or how that character behaves? And in my writer's notebook as well, I have a whole page dedicated to different character traits. So they can just look and pick 2 or 3 and make sure that they don't like conflict. So you don't want an angry and loving character. That doesn't make sense, right? So this is all covered in my writer's notebook for grades 3 and grade 4. I was showing you my grade 4 version. And sorry, I was showing you my grade 3 version. This is my grade 4 version. So it's a little bit more involved. There's a little bit more steps. But here in grade 4, we're expecting the students to write a few more juicier stories. So here you're talking about character and details. We have dialogue. So we're introducing how dialogue could be written. Main event, solution, and the thoughtful conclusions. We're not just saying the end. So that is how I would approach teaching a fictional narrative unit in my classroom. Again, this is a month-long thing. I would teach a little bit and then have the students practice writing it. Teach a little bit, have the students practice writing it. And by the end of the month, 4 or 5 weeks or so, they should have written a rough draft of a short story. If you're looking for resources to help you teach fictional narrative, you can absolutely find my writer's notebooks writer's notebooks resources in my TPT shop. But if you want something that really enhances your writing, I have used Empowering Writers in my classroom, and I have noticed a drastic difference in the way that my students have written. However, I will caveat that by saying the full program for Empowering Writers is very expensive. So it might be something that your school might purchase for you, or it might be a program that your school already has embedded in the classroom or in the school as well. But if you can't afford that, or if that's too much, you can also find my writer's notebooks in my TPT shop as well. So I hope you enjoyed this episode on how I would teach fictional narrative writing in my classroom. This is a new series that I would like to do on my YouTube channel where I take a lesson from my notebooks and I would go into detail about how I would introduce it and define it and do the instruction, and then the gradual release of responsibility. I'm going to have an episode like this every month, so stay tuned. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I highly recommend that you do so you don't miss any other episodes that are coming out in the series as well. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you think another educator in your life could benefit from this episode, feel free to share this video with them as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.